built a $12,000 surprise fund for my son. Then my wife showed her true colors when, at 46, I thought I understood the meaning of family loyalty. My career as a software engineer was stable, my marriage seemed solid, and my two boys were making their way in the world. But when my wife Rebecca made a demand so shocking it left me speechless, everything I believed about trust and fairness crumbled before my eyes. Living under our roof were two young men, each carving out his own path in life. My biological son Christopher, 19 years old, and my stepson Marcus, 21, both working retail jobs at different stores in our suburban neighborhood outside Phoenix. Marcus had landed his position first, naturally, being older and having more interview experience under his belt. Here's where my story takes an unexpected turn. When Christopher started bringing home those first paychecks, something inside me as a father kicked in hard. I made a decision that would later ignite a firestorm in my household. I began secretly setting aside 40% of his earnings, not out of greed or control, but out of love and the foresight that only comes from having lived through decades of financial mistakes myself. When I was Christopher's age, every dollar I earned burned a hole in my pocket faster than I could count it. Gaming systems, expensive sneakers, restaurant meals with friends, I blew through money like it was confetti at a New Year's party. Christopher knew I was taking a portion of his paycheck, but what he didn't know is that I was building something magnificent for his future, a surprise that would change everything. Rebecca was fully aware of my savings strategy from day one. We've always kept our finances separate, a boundary she insisted on after some devastating financial betrayals in her past relationships left her scarred and defensive about money matters. I respected that completely and never pushed for combined accounts or shared financial decisions. Fast forward 2 years, and Christopher was approaching his 21st birthday with dreams of purchasing his first real car. He'd been carefully budgeting with what remained of his paychecks after my deductions, calculating and recalculating how much he could realistically afford for a decent vehicle. That's when I decided it was time for the grand reveal. We sat down at our kitchen table one evening, papers spread out before us, and I watched his face transform from concentration to absolute disbelief as I explained the true balance of his savings. The money he thought he had access to was just the tip of the iceberg. Below the surface was a treasure trove I'd been building, matching every dollar he'd unknowingly contributed. The moment Christopher realized he had nearly $12,000 instead of the $4,000 he'd calculated, his reaction was pure magic. He literally launched himself across the table and wrapped me in a bear hug so fierce it nearly sent both of us tumbling to the floor. His joy was infectious, his gratitude overwhelming, and for that brief, shining moment, I felt like the greatest father who ever lived. But paradise has a way of crumbling when you least expect it. Marcus overheard our celebration, and suddenly the atmosphere in our house shifted like storm clouds rolling in. He felt slighted, overlooked, treated like a second-class citizen in his own home. The seeds of resentment that had been dormant for years suddenly sprouted into full-blown family warfare. Then came the moment that would shatter everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married. Rebecca cornered me in our bedroom one night, her eyes blazing with a determination I'd never seen before. Her demand hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. She wanted me to split Christopher's car fund down the middle, giving half to Marcus to ensure fairness and family harmony. The audacity of it left me thunderstruck. I was being asked to rob my son of money that was rightfully his, money I'd sacrificed and saved through my own careful planning and foresight. My response was immediate and unwavering. Absolutely not. I reminded her that she'd had the exact same opportunity to implement a savings plan for Marcus, but had chosen a different path. She could have started her own fund, could have taught him the value of delayed gratification, could have surprised him with her own financial planning. But she hadn't. That's when Rebecca deployed her nuclear option. She argued that because Christopher's college tuition was being covered by his grandparents, my savings plan was creating an unfair advantage. In her logic, since his educational costs were handled, I should redistribute his car money to level some imaginary playing field she'd constructed in her mind. Christopher stood his ground with the fierce determination of a young man who understood justice. There was no way anyone was touching money that came from his paychecks, especially since the additional contributions I'd made were my personal choice and had nothing to do with Rebecca's financial decisions or contributions. What started as family tension soon exploded into a neighborhood spectacle. Rebecca's relatives began inserting themselves into our private business, offering opinions nobody asked for and taking sides in a battle they had no right to join. Friends who'd once respected our family's boundaries suddenly felt entitled to weigh in on our domestic affairs. The pressure was suffocating, the judgment relentless. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize the person lying next to you every night has become a complete stranger? That's exactly what happened when Rebecca's demands escalated beyond anything I could have imagined possible. She didn't stop at the car fund. Oh no, that was just the opening act in her theater of the absurd. Next came a phone call that left me questioning whether I was living in reality or some alternate universe where entitlement had replaced common sense. Rebecca, calling from her sister's house, where she'd retreated after our latest explosive argument, delivered her next ultimatum with the confidence of someone who'd completely lost touch with reasonable expectations. If I couldn't afford to buy Marcus a car identical to Christopher's, then I should ask my parents to pay for Marcus's college tuition. My parents, people who barely knew Marcus, people who had no obligation whatsoever to fund the education of Rebecca's son. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was breathtaking. She was asking me to manipulate my elderly parents into paying tens of thousands of dollars for a young man they'd met perhaps a dozen times at family gatherings. The manipulation was so transparent, so calculating that it made my skin crawl. When I refused this latest demand, Rebecca's mask finally slipped completely. The woman I'd married disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone whose capacity for emotional manipulation knew no bounds. She accused me of being a terrible stepfather, of never truly accepting Marcus, of prioritizing my biological son above all else. That's when I knew our marriage was over. Not damaged, not struggling, but completely and irreversibly finished. Some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. Some words once spoken can never be taken back. Some betrayals cut so deep that healing becomes impossible. I filed for divorce the following week. Walking into that lawyer's office felt like stepping out of a nightmare and into the harsh but honest light of reality. The papers were drawn up with clinical precision, each page representing another step toward freedom from the toxic environment our home had become. When Rebecca received those divorce papers, her reaction was exactly what I'd expected: rage, denial, accusations, threats. She called me selfish, claimed I was destroying our family over money, insisted I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But by then, her words had lost all power over me. I'd finally seen her true nature, and it was uglier than anything I could have imagined. The proceedings revealed just how calculated Rebecca's financial strategy had been all along. While I'd been paying the mortgage, utilities, and most household expenses, she'd been quietly building her own nest egg. The house I'd been funding for years would need to be split equally, which meant I'd be entitled to recover a significant portion of my investment. My cousin, who happens to be a family law attorney, had warned me years earlier to keep detailed records of my financial contributions. That advice proved invaluable. Christopher handled the entire situation with a maturity that made me incredibly proud. When I finally revealed the full extent of the money I'd saved for him, his reaction was both humorous and touching. He laughed and said that if I hadn't put that money away, he probably would have blown it all on a high-end gaming setup and gained 30 pounds from sitting around playing video games all day. He used a portion of his savings to purchase a reliable used car and banked the rest for his future education expenses. Watching him make those mature financial decisions validated every choice I'd made as his father. But the story doesn't end with divorce papers and the division of assets. Life has a funny way of opening new doors just when you think you're trapped in a room with no windows. About 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I met someone who reminded me what healthy love actually looks like. Her name is Sarah, and she entered my life like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. We met at a coffee shop downtown, introduced by a mutual friend who insisted we'd hit it off immediately. Sarah is everything Rebecca wasn't: kind without manipulation, generous without expectation, loving without conditions. When she met Christopher, there was no jealousy, no competition, no demands for equal treatment or money. She simply accepted him as part of my life and built a genuine friendship with him based on mutual respect and shared interests. The three of us have created something beautiful together. Not a replacement for what was broken, but something entirely new and infinitely better. Christopher adores Sarah, and she treats him like the valuable young man he is, not an obstacle to overcome or a problem to solve. Looking back on that nightmare period with Rebecca, I can see it for what it truly was: a masterclass in manipulation disguised as concern about fairness. Her demands weren't about creating equality between the boys. They were about control, about bending me to her will, about testing how far she could push before I'd finally say enough. The truth is, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. The separate finances that seemed reasonable at first were actually a wall she'd built to avoid true partnership. The resentment she harbored about Christopher's advantages was really resentment about her own poor financial planning. The demands for equal treatment were actually demands for special treatment disguised as justice. Christopher is thriving now, excelling in college, and making smart decisions about his future. The money I save for him has given him options and opportunities that will serve him well for decades to come. More importantly, he learned valuable lessons about financial responsibility, delayed gratification, and the difference between earning something and expecting to be given something. As for Marcus, I genuinely hope he's finding his own path to success. The situation between Rebecca and me was never really about him. It was about two adults with fundamentally different values trying to force a relationship that was doomed from the start. What I've learned through this experience is that real family isn't about equal distribution of resources or forced fairness in every situation. Real family is about unconditional love, mutual respect, and supporting each other's growth and happiness. It's about making sacrifices for the people you care about without keeping score or demanding reciprocal gestures. The betrayal I experienced from Rebecca was devastating, but it led me to discover strength I didn't know I possessed and ultimately to find happiness I didn't think was possible. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us are actually the universe's way of clearing a path to something infinitely better. Today, as I sit in the peaceful home I share with Sarah and Christopher, I can honestly say I'm grateful for every painful moment that led me here. The storm has passed, the sun is shining, and the future looks brighter than I ever dared to imagine.